because PR was too bad. I mean, that's too evil if you go and deny people dying of AIDS their very much needed drugs. And this was, sorry, and that discussion led to also a new formulation of the problem inside the WTO. At the WTO Ministerial Conference in Cancun in 2001, there was an agreement that, no, sorry, Cancun was 2003. Just before Cancun, there was an agreement on how it would be possible to produce drugs and import drugs without paying money, without having to have a license from the patent holders. This needs a little bit more explaining. The very strange thing in the situation inside the WTO is that it is rather well possible to issue so-called compulsory licenses to produce a drug inside your country. For instance, for Brazil or for India or for South Africa, it's rather feasible that they have compulsory licenses, so no matter what the patent holder actually says, the local companies can produce it. But what has been completely forbidden is then to export those drugs to poorer countries, which are actually those which are most in need. In countries like Burkina Faso or Chad or Mozambique, there are no factories to produce high-quality drugs, no matter what patents. So,
closer to the mic.
Louder? Better? Okay. So, and what I said, in countries like Burkina Faso, there's no possibility to produce those drugs. So there has to be a possibility for them to import generic versions, non-patented versions of those drugs. And that's where the WTO was very, very hard against it. And they found a sort of compromise back in 2003 on that, but that was a very complicated process on how you get the possibility to import generic drugs from a different country. So before Hong Kong, the Hong Kong ministerial that took place in the mid of this December, the African Union had proposals how to change this. This was a temporary solution anyway, to make it more simple. That was one of the contested issues in TRIPS, current issues in TRIPS. And, yeah. Okay, this is, there's some, yeah?
Yeah, that's a reason, just to illustrate how important it is for countries to have generic drugs if they can't afford others. Well, this is just an example of a certain AIDS, HIV drug. When it came out, the originator asked for $10,439. Then Brazil started to produce it without a patent license and asked for $2,767. And then the originator actually dropped to $727. And now it's about, well, Aurobindo produces it for $209. This is important to illustrate that it's very important for countries to actually be able to buy generics. It's not as easy to produce these drugs at home for that price, and also it's not that easy just to import from one certain country, because if Burkina Faso would have imported it from Brazil, they would have paid $2,767, even though shortly afterwards it was easy to get them for $727. Yeah.
Yeah, Brazil is an example that worked quite nicely. The possibility to issue compulsory licenses. Actually, what they didn't issue many compulsory licenses, but they threatened companies to issue those, so prices went down quite a lot. But this is possible for Brazil, which has a very well-developed pharmaceutical industry. Another country that's very proficient in producing generic drugs is India. India has been the country supplying most of the poor world with very otherwise expensive drugs, for instance, against HIV in the last years. But because of TRIPS, India had to pass a new patent law in 2005, which made it a lot more difficult to produce drugs. So in the next years, the role that India played up until now is not going to last, because now they have to adhere to the TRIPS regulations on patents on pharmaceutical agents.
Yeah, okay. No, it's all right. Yeah, I'll just continue. Well, we talked about all this, basically. It's about the amendment that was made just before Cancun. There was a provisional settlement about the import that allowed countries to import drugs from other countries. This settlement was so complicated it actually wasn't used till now. The way it works basically is that you have to actually tell the WTO you have a problem in your country, and then you go to then the WTO says, okay, you are allowed to produce or you're allowed to import. Then you have to ask another country, can you provide me these drugs? If it can't, you have to ask another country. You can't just go on the world market and say, I want these drugs. It's not possible. Which hits, well, none other than the very poor countries. Also, no export into non-WTO countries is possible, which are still quite a few. There's 201 states or so in the world, and only 149 are actually members of the WTO. The deadline for the amendment elapsed in 2004, and in 2004 and end of 2004 and 2005, the African Union proposed a different amendment to make the access easier. Well, just before the WTO ministerial in Hong Kong, there was the big press release that there was now better access for the least developed countries, which meant, well, we made the amendment final. It's the same as before. It hasn't ever been used so far, but still, now it's, well, final. Yeah. Yeah. Your turn.
Okay, so I want to show what has been done on December 6 inside the WTO negotiations. That's, as Julian just said, they just incorporate the current temporary regulations into the TRIPS treaty and made a big PR fuss out of it. It was very cool. Now every problem is solved, but you know, this is the same procedure that has been in effect for the last 2 years and has never been used so far. So it's not very likely that this will help anybody who is in need for cheap drugs. The second thing they made is that they extended the deadline for least developed countries to introduce patents on drugs until 2013. That's a lot less than actually was demanded. The Zambia asked for 2020, which is fits much more within their state of development. And what is also, so far we've been talking mostly about the impact on the developing countries, but what's also interesting with the whole debate on the avian flu, Vogelgrippe, is that many developed countries, including our own government, said they're never going to import patented drugs whatsoever, whatever the pandemic situation, whatever natural catastrophes, whatever war, whatever, which is very, very strange thing to say. In effect. Yep. And what is also very important, I think, is to see who is actually playing against the needs of people to access to drugs. And the strongest opponents of this are United States, Switzerland, and Germany. By the way, this didn't change with the change of government. Has been that way for the last years, and is
it has been since we have a strong pharmaceutical industry, basically. Yeah, that's some nice pictures from the WTO ministerial. While I'll tell you a bit, I think we forgot the software patent slide, didn't we? So I'll just tell you about the software patent thing. Because software patents are not in the TRIPS agreement. TRIPS does not include the patenting of software, whereas the pro-patent lobby always states the opposite. They always pretend that that it is regulated by the TRIPS because the TRIPS says technical inventions. Now the problem is technical inventions are at the moment not really regulated in Europe. That was the whole issue with the software patent debate until a few months ago, and it's going to come again. And the big problem about this is, as soon as Europe adopts these software patents, there will be a strong push into the WTO, into the TRIPS agreement from the US and Europe towards countries like Brazil and India to also adopt software patents. India, for example, voted against software patents last year. I don't believe they have the same possibilities as soon as Europe also has a software patent law, because then everybody will claim software patents are part of the TRIPS, and there would be a strong force towards these countries to adopt their own software patent law. So there's the link between like medicine and others, and also in the patent area, also software patents. It's very important to know that the TRIPS can here work as a strong weapon towards other countries like Brazil and India, and therefore it is also very dangerous for their movements towards free software and access to knowledge and so on. We're going to carry on with Oliver's own report from the ministerial conference in Hong Kong, which he attended. Yeah, please.
Okay. Actually, to sum up from the beginning, it was quite strange, because in Hong Kong there this huge conference hall. There were like, I think, 2,000 delegates from governments, another 2,000 journalists, another 3,000 NGO people, and 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 people on the street coming from South Korea, from Latin America, from the Philippines, from Indonesia to protest against WTO. And if you compare this big effort to the tiny part that was actually discussed, it's a bit strange. But coming to what were the hot topics during the conference, I mean, the hottest topics were agriculture and so the opening up of the markets of the north for agriculture, and in exchange the opening up of the markets for goods, agriculture and services in the south. But talking about what was important in TRIPS, so one part was the whole thing about biopiracy. Biopiracy is the act where mostly defined as the act where companies of the north go to southern countries, take plants or animal varieties, take the DNA or extra specimens and patent them.
Do you read your spam mail? Because sometimes you get spam mail with Hoodia cactus products, and that's actually an act of biopiracy, because Hoodia cactus was an African cactus plant, which was then extracted to Europe and patented by some English company, and now it works as a slimming medicine. Yeah, so read your spam mail, you know. Yeah, maybe you tell me how your spam filter works, please.
I wouldn't overgeneralize the phrase "you read your spam mail." Can be quite funny sometimes. But coming back to the problem of biopiracy, that was dealt with partly inside the Convention on Biological Diversity, Biodiversitätskonvention in German. By the way, I'm curious, how many of you guys don't speak German? Oh yeah, okay. So we didn't go through all this effort without any reason. That's nice. And sorry for my pronunciation. But in the Convention on Biological Diversity, which was decided on, negotiated during the Rio Conference, the Earth Summit back in '92, there were two standards enshrined on how to deal with the patenting of biological entities, and one is these are prior informed consent. So before you go to the jungle and take some plant out, you have to ask the people whether this is okay. And secondly, benefit sharing. So the actual benefit coming from these plants has to be shared with the people living there where the plants originated. TRIPS doesn't know any of this. Also, most of the